What is your worst date? My worst date? Many years back, I met a really cute guy at the local handball courts. We exchanged information and decided to hang out the next day. I got all gussied up and he picked me up in the same clothing he was wearing at the park. Red flag right there, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he had many pairs of the same sweats. Guys always have many white tees, etc. So we start driving and I ask what was the plan, where we were going, and he tells me that he is kind of low on cash, but thought it would be fun if we went back to his place and watched movies. See, now I know what that means, but as a 16, 17, or 18-year-old, I can't remember exact age, I thought, oh, all right. He is older, maybe he had to pay rent or something as I look into his big green eyes. I half-heartedly agree and we head over to his place. I walk in and he begins to tell me that he lives with his mom and his ex-girlfriend moved out a while back. He takes me to his room and I immediately am taken aback. He has pictures all over his bedroom of him and his ex-girlfriend. I understand this is like the third red flag, but I begin to rationalize this by saying to myself, "Aw, he's so heartbroken about his ex-girlfriend, he can't bear to take the pictures down. I will heal his heart." Women are stupid, I know. So we started talking as he put some movie on and he asked me 3 questions about myself. As I begin to answer question number 3, he stops me and says, "I have heard and learned enough about you. I really like you and I think it's time for us to have intimacy." I get up, grab my bag and literally run out of there. As I look back, I know it was a stupid move and I could have been terminated, but teenagers are stupid. And I'm glad I am alive to tell the tale and share it on Reddit. Well, that's one way to end a first date, a lesson in trusting your instincts, I guess. Story 2. Back in my OkCupid days, I was trying my best to get myself out there and at the very least meet new people. I was new to the city, had a very small social group, and decided to just use OkCupid as a way to meet new people, and if it went well from there, then great. Talked to one guy for a while over messages and texts, and he seemed pretty cool. Decent enough looking photos, seemed a bit shy and nerdy, but that's okay. Wasn't into gaming, but then again, hey, so am I. Finally, he asked me out to coffee just to meet, and I agreed. So far as I understood and we agreed upon, it wasn't a date, it was just a meeting. I dressed as I usually do, clean, not ratty, regular looking clothes. I think I was in jeans and a Doctor Who t-shirt. Showered, hairbrush, teeth brushed that morning. He showed up in the rattiest looking clothes I'd ever seen, full of holes and stained. Full neck beard, looked like he hadn't shaved in a week. Smelled like he hadn't bathed in 2 weeks, and discolored nasty looking teeth with bits of stuff between them. Showed up at the coffee house and we went to the counter to order. I ordered something and the barista took his order as well. When she asked if they were going to be on the same check, he blurted out yes, then walked away to a table, leaving me to pay for both drinks and carry them back to the table. I placed his drink in front of him. He looked down at it, then back up at me and flatly informed me he took his coffee with 2 sugars and cream, then sat back in his chair and glared daggers at me. I should have told him to shove it and left, but I stupidly took his drink back and doctored it up for him, assuming that maybe he was just very socially awkward and brought it back to him. He took a sip, gave me a disgusted look, and pushed his drink away from him towards my side of the table. For the next 15 minutes, I tried to initiate conversation about something, anything. He just grunted one-word answers like yes, no, maybe, I don't know. As he looked around the room at walls, paintings, other patrons, and my chest, still sitting back in his chair with his arms crossed. At that point, I got up and left. I didn't say a word, just took my coffee and walked out, drove home, and had a drink. I got a message from him the next day on OkCupid asking me why I had been such a cold witch. I deleted my account, blocked his number from my phone. I still, to this day, have no clue what all that was about. I firmly believe those people have mothers that baby them until they hit their late 20s. Story 3. A few years back, a guy I knew and liked, he was handsome, a little older, and fun to be around, let's call him D, called me up and asked if I wanted to come hang out at his place. I agree, and D says, cool, just so you know, I have a few friends over and we're smoking right now, but they're leaving soon, so come on over and we'll see where the night goes. Not a problem, I say. I've smoked some trees in the past and it certainly wasn't a deal breaker. Well, I show up and his friends are still there. Again, not a problem when it comes to smoking, the more the merrier. So as I sit down, I find it odd that I don't smell any grass. Sure enough, when they said smoking, they didn't mean grass, they're smoking. So I politely decline and begin to contemplate my escape. D and I start to chit-chat. And I notice that he's not smoking, so I think, great, maybe his friends are users, but it seems like he's not into it. A small time passes and it stops being awkward that people are doing that around me, especially because the host and I aren't partaking. D then calls me into the other room and closes the door. He proceeds to start kissing me, and given that we had made out in the past, it wasn't that unexpected. Finally, I think, the night's going somewhere. Well, as soon as I get that thought out, he pulls down. Okay, forward, but not unwelcome. He pulls away and reaches into his dresser where he proceeds to pull out a substance. Hold this, he says, and grabs some lotion. I don't remember exactly what my reaction was. I seem to remember saying I was allergic to the lotion. Smooth, I know. And almost running out of there after saying my goodbyes. Story 4. I posted this before, but this thread seems appropriate. Asked a girl out in late spring, so we decided to walk around outside. It was nice out, and she went to a different school than I did, so she showed me around campus for a while. It was pretty interesting. She was probably slightly out of my league, and I thought things were going well. We decided to grab a bite to eat at a place in the nearby bar district and sat outside. Halfway into the meal, a hobo wanders down the street playing a harmonica and just rocking out. We barely even noticed him because things were going pretty smoothly and we had just discovered that we enjoyed the same kind of music. All of a sudden, we hear a lot of shouting and look over to see another homeless man had appeared on the scene, angry at the former homeless guy about who owned that particular spot. It got pretty heated. We tried to ignore it, but it was slightly impossible as they were about 10 feet away from us. All of a sudden, the second homeless guy pulls a weapon and hurts the first guy. He passed away really quickly. We were questioned by the police, had to make statements and everything. Basically ruined the evening, and I got one more date out of it where we struggled to make conversation. After that, things were just really anticlimactic. Story 5. I met this young woman for dinner. She was never married, no kids. She got super hammered, ended up saying a lot of crazy crap. I could write an entire story about the evening, but here's the kicker. At one point, I see her eyes light up as she apparently remembered she hadn't told me something important. She says, OMG, I haven't shown you my daughter. What's this all about? I wondered. Thought she didn't have kids. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a Polaroid and handed it across the table to me. It was a picture of her sitting in a hospital room chair with some guy's arm over her shoulder, both smiling at the camera, holding a baby. At this point, I had no reaction. It had been 3 hours into the night and an ever-increasing string of surreal events. I just handed it back and said, I've got nothing to say about that. Story 6. In high school, I took this girl out to dinner and a movie as a first date. It was mostly as a courtesy to a friend because this girl would always be the third wheel to their dates. We finish up the movie and I'm driving her home when she says to take a turn here and there to make it back to her house. Turns out she had decided that it'd be prudent for me to meet her grandparents. This is fine enough with me. I have an easy time mingling with the golden oldies. However, it is about 10 minutes before her curfew when we arrive at her grandparents' house. Before we even walk in, I tell her to call her parents and let them know. She puts up a fuss and says they won't care and to not worry. Time goes by and we end up at her grandparents for an uncomfortable 30 to 45 minutes. All the while, I am saying that it is past her curfew and her parents don't know we are there. We make the 15-minute drive back to her house and it is completely uncomfortable. The mother rushes her to the next room and muffled yelling occurs. I'm sitting at a table when the father comes into the house and gives me a cold look and yells some more. This is just a bit much for me, but I handle it okay and go home. As soon as I walk in, within curfew, my mom starts yelling, "Where the hell have you been?" And I'm wondering what is going on. Well, it turns out the father drove to my house and started banging on the door, yelling at the top of his lungs that I have his daughter and he wants her back. My mom doesn't know who this man is, and in the panic from beyond the locked door hears, "Your son has got my quarter, your son has got my quarter, and I want it back." My mom freaks out, thinking there's a psycho at the door and gets a weapon and calls my uncle from across the road, who also grabs a weapon and yells across the road to leave or he is going to get. My mom is yelling back through the door that, "If my son has your quarter, he'll give it back to you tomorrow," to try to appease him. He eventually leaves and I finally convince my mom that the family is crazy and we all have a good laugh about it later. However, this has to be the worst date ever. Story 7. So I have a few, but the best one, hands down, has got to be from my college days. There was this cute guy in one of my classes and we'd always talk and flirt. Finally, one day he asked me to have lunch with him. I agree, and so we leave campus together in his car. He tells me he has to stop by his house first and make sure that his brother was able to get in the house. When we arrive, I really have to pee, so I ask him if I can use his bathroom. Now, this day happens to be during one of my feminine days of the month, and I had run out of tampons and was using a maxi pad. I proceeded to use this toilet, and it looks like someone was murdered in that bowl. I go to flush, and nothing happens. All I can think was, seriously? This is not happening. I opened the tank of the toilet to try and get it to flush that way, and there was no water in it. I close the lid to the bowl and step into the hallway and ask how I flushed the toilet, to which he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll flush it tonight. We got to bring in a jug of water to get it to flush." There was nothing I could do. I was going to leave what looked like an in this boy's toilet, and I couldn't even imagine his horror when he discovered it that night. Needless to say, after that day, we never really spoke to one another again. Story 8. I'm not sure if this qualifies, but my worst date was also my best date. I picked up my girlfriend planning on proposing to her. I took her to one of our favorite parks and surprised her with a picnic, which we both enjoyed. When we were done, I sat on the ground next to her, looked into her beautiful green eyes, and said, "I love you so much. Will you marry me?" She replied with a shocked look and something like, "Oh, sure, whatever." My proposal had caught her off guard and went completely over her head. So now, in my mind, I think, "Oh, you idiot, you screwed this up so badly." And out of my mouth came the words, "No, you idiot, I'm proposing to you." Chalk that up to an extreme case of nerves. She said yes, and we've been married for 11 years. Our first child is due in a few days. Story 9. No one will probably read this far into the thread, but here it goes. In 2005, I was on OkCupid and met this guy who seemed smart, interesting, and funny. So we chatted a bit online for a few days, and then we met at a coffee shop. All seemed normal and well, and he seemed like a nice enough guy. A week later, he invited me out for dinner. We had dinner, and it was all normal and fine. Again, there weren't fireworks, but I wasn't put off by him or anything either. There were some things that now I know are warning signs. He made strange comments that, looking back, were really kind of crazy and woman-hating, like making insulting remarks about women in the restaurant. "She's dressed like a street worker. I bet those are fake," etc. And talking about how much he liked the idea of a submissive Asian woman. We were at a sushi restaurant. I was 20, please don't judge my stupidity. Anywho, he sent me a message a few nights later and asked me if I wanted to come over and hang out. I didn't have any plans that night and I was bored. He lived about a mile from my apartment, so I walked to his house. I didn't have plans to sleep with him, and the extent of the physicality of our relationship up to that point were a couple hugs. When I arrived, it was clear to me he had been drinking. He wasn't fully intoxicated, but he was well on his way there. He offered me a drink, and I declined. We hung out, listened to music, played music. He was a musician, and I just liked to tinker. Talked, and everything was generally okay. Then he starts telling me crazy stories about his life, how he was mistreated by a relative. His best friend in high school passed away in a car accident with him in the car. His mother was schizophrenic, etc. Then he starts talking about how lonely and sad he was and how long it had been since he had met a woman he liked. He told me how much he liked me, how attractive he thought I was, and how much he wanted to have intimacy with me. We had cuddled and kissed a bit earlier in the night, but I was not interested in this dude right then, especially knowing he was hammered and acting a bit strange. He started coming on to me really strongly and grabbing at me. I moved away and tried to tell him I wasn't interested when he literally started begging me for intimacy. He was whining and pleading and begging, telling me he'd do anything I wanted. I really had no idea how to react. This had never happened to me before. I felt really uncomfortable and should have left right then, but I felt bad for him. He was clearly damaged and hammered. I tried to tell him I liked him but didn't want to have intimacy right then. I made some comment about how I needed to leave soon when he grabbed me. I'd been sitting on a couch. I jumped up and started to grab my purse and coat, which was behind the couch. As I was turned around and started moving towards the door, he yelled after me, begging me to touch it or kiss it. I ran out of his house and sprinted back home. Weirdest crap ever, man. He never contacted me again, but a couple years later, I ran into him at a bookstore. He looked at me and started walking towards me like he was going to talk to me when I power walked out of there. Story 10. I recently took a girl out and she spent all night on her phone. She was on the phone when I picked her up and got off right before we got out at the restaurant. Then, right when we're about to walk into the restaurant, she takes a call from someone else and talks for about 15 minutes while I'm just standing off to the side waiting. At dinner, she was having about 5 different texting conversations, and I had to repeat everything I said because she was constantly looking down at her phone texting. On top of that, she didn't eat anything she ordered and drank a ton of beer. By this time, I was way over this date. Of course, she took another call as soon as we got in the car, and she was still talking when I dropped her off. I think she was expecting me to walk her to her door, but I just drove off without saying anything. Altogether, we may have had 3 minutes worth of conversation in the hour and a half that the date lasted. She texted me a couple weeks later asking if I wanted to take her out again. No thanks. Story 11. My worst date was a 12-hour marathon date that included a trip to the hospital, questioning by police, and ended up with her crying. It was followed by a call from her lawyer 6 months later asking if I would be willing to defend her in court. Shiver. She was driving and I was in the passenger seat. She was a bit of an airhead and was not paying attention to the road. She was looking at me instead of the road like they do in movies when they drive. Me, watch out, there's someone on the road. My date, haha, you're so funny. Me, stop the car, there was someone in the road. My date, oh no, slams on brakes. We hit a woman and landed on the side of the road. We get out and go check on her and she's not moving. My date, oh God, she's gone, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. About this time, a crowd starts forming, police are called. A bunch of people are standing over the woman when she starts to move and say something. She begins to mumble what sounds like the name of the woman I am with. Me thinking, that can't be what she said. I look over at my date and she has a dumbfounded look on her face. The woman then clearly says the name of my date. The person she just hit with a car is now pointing at her and saying her name. It's like something from a teen horror movie. My date, oh crap, I know her. She's my ex-boyfriend's mom. Me thinking you just ran over your ex's mom while on a date with another guy? At this point, I'm wondering what she will do to my mother after we break up. We go inside and call her mother to pick her up. After talking to the police, her mother asked me to drive her van and she would drive the daughter's car home with her. I then find myself driving a van of a woman I have never met with her 2 children in it. There is so much strangeness in the date I could not fit it into this message post. It will be a 20-page story, so I'll just stop it here. Story 12. When I was in 9th grade, this one pretty cute blonde girl asked if I wanted to go catch a movie together. I didn't really have many friends in 9th grade, and I had never even really been on a date, so I was like, heck yes. I go over to her house, and it turns out her parents decided they were going to go along with us. That was a little awkward, but I was like, I guess beggars can't be choosers, so I just went with it. We get to the theater, and we're planning to see some John Grisham movie. I think it was The Rainmaker. But tickets were all sold out, so we ended up going to the only movie available at the time, Flubber, with Robin Williams. Even as a 9th grader, I knew that was going to be a terrible movie just by looking at the poster. Then we get in the movie theater and the place is packed out. The girl and her mom ended up sitting a few rows back, and I ended up sitting on the very front row, neck ache row, with her dad. The movie was crap, of course, and after it ended, we all ended up walking around the mall and getting Cinnabon. Whatever was in my Cinnabon gave me a really, really bad stomach ache, so we're walking around the mall and I'm doubled over in pain. They were all like, do you need to go home? And I was like, probably yeah. So they ended up taking me back and dropping me off. Then when I got home, I found out that my grandpa had just passed away. And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 13. I had a girl beg me to take her out. I can't drive, so she had to pick me up and we went to this restaurant on the other side of town. Everything seemed to be going fine. I had her laughing and was telling her a bunch of interesting stories. She had my attention the entire time as well. She was far from boring. Just when I finished eating, I started to feel lightheaded. This is very rare for me, but it's happened before, and I knew what was going to happen next. Before I could warn her, I passed out at the table. I fell on the floor. When I came to, she was gone and the owner of the restaurant was hassling me to pay the bill. I paid the bill and walked the 11 miles home. I tried calling everyone I knew, but no one was answering their phone. There's no public transportation in our area either. I ran into her a week later. Curious to what her excuse would be, I asked her where she got off to that night. She called me a freak and asked me to go crawl under a rock and pass away. That was pretty much the last straw for me. I gave up on finding someone to be with. Story 14. My worst date is also my best date because of the hilarity. It was the day after my 25th birthday. Birthday itself was awesome. The day after, everyone was super busy and I felt lonely. Dude calls me to see if I want to go out. He'd been asking me out for months. I said sure. He arrived in about 5 minutes as I was getting in the shower. I told him to make himself comfy while I got ready. As I only had one bathroom, he said he needed to use the toilet. He whizzed, possibly more because it took forever, and talked to me through the shower curtain. Had to ask him to step out so I could dress, left and put my makeup on in the car. He said we were going to dinner, so I asked him to stop at an ATM so I could get some money. When I got out to use the ATM, he rolled his car over my foot. When we got to the restaurant, he began telling me about his dog and talking in the voice of his dog. Every time I said anything, it reminded him of a Family Guy episode, which he would practically recite in its entirety. When the check came, I picked it up and told him what the total was, $45. He asked me if I wanted to go Dutch or what. He then told me he had $18. I paid the difference, plus tip. By that time, I told him I was starting to feel really sick. He said, "That's cool, but I want to go rent a movie." I said I didn't have any more money, and I know he didn't, and I just wanted to go home and sleep. He drove me home, and in my driveway, he told me he had gotten some gifts for me. They were a bottle of aphrodisiac lotion and a fake gold and rhinestone tennis bracelet. Then he went in for the kiss and told me he had a really great time. In my haste to get out, I left my makeup in his car. By the way, he's a really nice guy, which made it 10 times worse because I kind of felt like a witch. Well, nice guy or not, that sounds like a terrible date to me. I don't really blame her. Some guys are just weird. Story 15. It was grade 11, and I just moved to a new town. I quickly became attracted to this one girl and would have given my left jewels for a date. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class, and I totally pulled out all the stops. I was doing whatever it took to get a date with this girl. In the class, there were a couple of projects where you would have to sew a pillowcase or repair pajamas, etc. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the projects at her house. Upon these visits, I began to question how badly I wanted this girl. She lived in what appeared to be a wood cabin, and her father seemed legitimately insane. And by this time, I was starting to gain some friendships in the school, and one of the guys I met, Neil, noticed that I'd taken a liking to her. He then asked me if I'd heard about her parents. He then proceeded to tell me that her dad ended her mom and got away with it. He got off on the charges from lack of proof, and she had to live with him because he was her last living relative. At this point, I was like, what the hell? The story made no sense and I wasn't about to believe it, but it definitely kind of rattled me. But there was no way that I was going to bring it up to her. Anyways, a little time passes and I ask her out. I go to her place to grab her and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, you know what'll happen to you if you touch her. And suddenly the story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, and I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that her dad was going to end me when we got back to her place. So after a subpar date, I started the long drive back to her place. We get to the end of her driveway, a long driveway. She had an acreage. And she gets me to park and turn off the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, I forget her dad. I lean over and put some moves on. We stop. I turn the lights back on. There's red liquid in the snow at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but didn't want to sound like a wuss. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I put the car in drive and started the winding drive down her driveway. The trail seems to be getting thicker, and I'm getting more freaked out. She still says nothing as she's fixing her hair in her mirror. I keep driving. I turn the last corner of her driveway and see my headlights shift from the trees to her father standing in the middle of the driveway, covered in red liquid. I start hyperventilating. Suddenly, I'm crying and don't know why. I whiz my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out I have had mild asthma for my entire life and had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway before we got back. Anyways, that was a little over 3 years ago, and I'm still with the girl. Her dad calls me a wuss all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex. Her parents split up. Her mom's actually pretty awesome too. So yeah, that was my worst date ever. Story 16. Well, it wasn't my date, but the worst one I've witnessed was this. College town, low-key coffee house, great for first dates for people who don't have much money but don't want to be on campus. I go there with my sketchbook to draw people frequently. I'm sketching this couple, which is obviously on their first pseudo date. She's nervous and quiet, and he's excited and won't shut up. I was actually sketching the dude at the time, so I'm pretty tuned into that crap. Then I catch on to what he's talking about. He's explaining the plot of the movie The Rock to his date. Maybe explaining it doesn't put it in perspective. He's pretty much dictating the screenplay to her. She hasn't seen it, and she makes a couple mildly interesting comments like, interesting. You know, that reminds me of something else. It's clear she's bored by this. He's been explaining the nuances of Nick Cage's character for 10 minutes solid, and it's clear she likes the guy because she's taking it like a champ. Every time she tries to derail him, he just says, "Oh, where was I?" and continues explaining the movie. I'm losing my crap meanwhile and try to dictate all the ridiculous crap that's being said. After the 20-minute mark, I see her eyes start to twitch. She's checking her watch and her phone in turns now. The dude isn't getting it. Eventually, she's had enough and says, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but I've got a big test on Monday and my mom is coming into town tomorrow. I think I need to head out." He proceeds to stand and put on his jacket so they can leave together, but she basically grabs all her crap and bolts out of there and looks over her shoulder and says, "Later," before he even knows what's going on. Story 17. One time I was talking to this girl via MySpace that randomly friended me. I was 17 at the time, very dumb of me, and she happened to live around 15 minutes from me. She told me that she and her cousin were throwing a party at their place later and that I should come. I was bored and recently got out of a relationship, so I thought even though I had never met this chick, it'd be a good idea to go over and try to meet some new girls. I looked up the directions to her place and I can tell it's in the backwoods area. I live in Louisiana. So I was already thinking it was sketchy, but I went with it. I find the place and it turns out to be this really crappy looking trailer park, like some place you would definitely find a few small labs. I walk up and the girl lets me in and it's got this extremely weird feeling in the air. I sit down and start talking to the girl. She's the only one there at this point. And she was just talking about music and whatnot and then was saying her cousin saw me on MySpace and was looking to meet up with somebody so I could easily get lucky tonight. I was thinking, that'd be awesome if the girl was attractive. I might go with it, but about 1 minute later, the cousin walks in with a baby and comes and introduces herself to me. This chick was fairly large and had some seriously ugly teeth. The area I lived around that time had some real problems with the crap and the most country accent I had ever heard at the time. At this point, I'm freaking out inside my head because having never been in this situation, I'm just absolutely astonished. So these two girls who I've now definitely concluded are crazy are sitting there talking to me, baby still on the cousin, when this guy with a lazy eye walks in with one of those cardboard cup holder things you would get from McDonald's holding 4 daiquiris. I'm not even sure that this crap is actually happening when he walks in because it seems like one of those situations you would only see in a movie. So the chick with the baby says that now that the drinks are here, it's time to party, which makes it even weirder that the plan for a party was us 4. Anyway, the chick puts the baby in a car seat type thing and puts the baby in the bathroom and shuts the door. Now I know crap is way out of hand and I'm not even going to stick around for whatever would happen next. After the chick went and put her baby in the bathroom, the guy looked around the entertainment center and found some burnt CDs and put them into this really beat up looking stereo system. The reason I say stereo is because it was like, I'm having a hard time describing this, but it was pretty much a CD player that was somehow spliced together to 2 really old computer speakers. So the guy presses a few buttons on the stereo player and it starts playing this really, really, really crappy techno music. And as you can imagine, the quality of the speakers were horrendous. This really caught me off guard because, as you can tell, these were some really white trash/redneck looking people. So they start drinking and offer me some, to which I decline. I sat through about 1 song when the chick that just locked her baby in the bathroom, the baby was awake by the way, got her cousin to move away from me and she sat next to me and started rubbing my leg and was telling me how she was feeling so lonely because her and her baby daddy had just broken up and she needed a quote-unquote friend. This was as far as I was going to let this go, so I did that old thing where you get your phone to set off its own ringer, and I went outside to take a call. As soon as I got outside, I made a dash to my truck, opened the door, turned the thing on, and floored it in reverse, sending rocks from the gravel road everywhere. I hauled out of that trailer park. After a few minutes, I guess they realized that I wasn't there, and the first girl I had talked to on MySpace kept calling my phone, but I never answered. As soon as I got home, I removed her, blocked her, whatever you had to do on MySpace to keep somebody from seeing you. I know this may not have exactly been a date, but I classify it as such because I went in with the intent of some chick. That was the only time I ever looked on the internet for a meetup or even gave it a single thought. To this day, I don't know what happened to those people, but I hope that baby grows up and realizes that her mother is insane. Story 18. No one will ever read this, but this is my worst by far. I got set up on a blind date with a friend's nephew. He called and told me I had to come pick him up because his car had recently been stolen. Okay. I pick him up and ask where he wants to eat, and he suggests a really nice seafood place 2 towns over. I have to put gas in my car, so I get out and pump the gas, get back in, and go to change the radio station. And all of my radio presets are different. He laughed and said he'd change them because my music tastes a little funny, huh? Then we get to the restaurant. He orders the double lobster special and talks on his cell phone most of the time, at one point telling his friend on the other end that He'd give me about a 6 out of 10, but he hadn't seen me from behind real good yet. The bill comes, he tells me he forgets his wallet, and I'm so angry I can't even see when I sign the credit card slip. I go to take him home, and he convinces me to drop him off at a bar instead. I make it like I'm going to park and come in like he wants, but I hang back in the parking lot, ready to run back to the car. He comes running out of the bar with a Budweiser in his hand, forgot his wallet, huh? And tells me to get the hell inside because there's a sleazy woman in there who just broke up with him and he'd like to make out in front of her so she'd get jealous. He tried to friend me on Facebook a while ago, which is when I quit Facebook. Story 19. So I'd met this girl online. She was a friend of a friend. We got to talking for a bit and eventually decided to hang out. She lived about 30 minutes away in the middle of absolute nowhere, so I had to drive up to meet her. Since I'm not familiar with the area, I asked her where she would like to eat. She says, "Oh, well, my favorite restaurant is not too far from here. We can go there. It's really fancy and expensive, though." I told her that I didn't really mind, that I was willing to go wherever, and asked her what the restaurant was called. She says, "Oh, it's Red Lobster." Now, I'm not one to care about how much money people have, but I was quite shocked that she thought Red Lobster was a high-class establishment. However, I let it ride because maybe to her, Red Lobster is the epitome of fine dining. Turns out, Red Lobster is another 30 minutes away. On the way there, we pass a handful of other restaurants, Olive Garden being one of them. This is one of those details that get dropped in stories very nonchalantly, like, I wonder if this will be important later. Anyway, so we get to Red Lobster, and the hostess is walking us to our table. She seats us, hands us our menus, and begins talking about the specials. Before she's even able to finish, my date blurts out, "I already know what I want." It was so awkward. She didn't say it in a rude way. She said it in a more exciting way. Like it was awesome that she already knew what she wanted and everyone needed to know. Anyway, the hostess is stunned and just kind of walks away. Eventually, the waiter comes to our table and she orders. She gets shrimp Alfredo with no shrimp. At this point, I'm stunned. She made us drive 30 minutes, which is a long time to spend in a car on the first date, so she could get fettuccine Alfredo. Clearly, this was the best restaurant choice and not the Olive Garden. I still let all of this slide because at this point, she just seemed really eccentric, and I thought that maybe if I got to know her better, then her behavior would be less odd. After dinner, we are closer to my place than hers, and she wants to go back to my place to watch a movie. I oblige, obviously. We get back there and I ask her what movie she wants to watch. She picks Happy Feet. Mother frickin' Happy Feet. I guess at this point it's my own fault for even asking, so we started watching Happy Feet. She wastes no time jumping, so I don't make too much of a fuss. Now stuff is coming off to the soundtrack of Happy Feet, really awkward. She starts talking about how great she is as a little warm-up dirty talk. This was surprisingly not as awkward as it could have been, Happy Feet aside, and it was effective. Then she looks up at me and says, "I don't mess around with guys that are not my boyfriend, so ask me to be your girlfriend." So I did. We dated for about 3 weeks after that, and she only got more crazy and more weird. She actually got married a little while back, but before doing that, she contacted me on Facebook to see if I wanted to have one more try with her. I informed her that I would not be interested, to say the least. Story 20. I was on a day with a guy I knew from class. We went to a local bar to see this Nirvana cover band he loved. I wasn't half as excited about a Nirvana cover band, but sure, why not? The band is taking a long time to set up and he suddenly decides he wants a candy bar. Just out of the blue, he says, "I want a candy bar." So I'm a bit confused and ask if he wants me to go with him. He says no, he'll be right back, yada yada yada. I was already getting the, well, I've been ditched vibes as I watched him walk out and head to the gas station right across the street. He did not come back after about an hour and did not answer his cell phone. I decided to head home and of course my car won't start. Thankfully, my friend came to pick me up and listens to my woes. Cue to the next time I have class, he actually approaches me and acts as if nothing happened. I ended up asking if he went all the way to Hershey's for that candy bar, and he brushes it off as just being scatterbrained. Yes, his excuse for never coming back was he forgot he was on a date. About a year later, he had a complete mental breakdown, thought he was a middle-aged Marine, bought a Ferrari he couldn't afford, and ended a friend while driving intoxicated. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.